Colonel John Hargrave had spent 23 years in the United States Marine Corps, and in that time he believed he had seen it all. He had led men through the scorching heat of desert warfare, navigated the bureaucratic minefields of the Pentagon, and mediated disputes between hardened infantrymen with the patience of a diplomat. He understood the uniform, the regulations, and the unspoken code that bound the Corps together tighter than any bloodline. Respect for the rank was the bedrock of that code. It was simple, clear, and non-negotiable. You saw an officer, you rendered the proper courtesy. It was the first thing a recruit learned, and the last thing a Marine forgot. So, on a blustery Tuesday morning at Camp Lejeune, as he conducted his weekly inspection of the base's perimeter security, he wasn't expecting any surprises. The wind whipped across the open parade grounds, carrying the sharp, salt-tinged scent of the nearby coast. Colonel Hargrave, a man whose posture was a testament to a life of discipline, walked with a measured pace, his eyes missing nothing. He noted the fresh paint on the curb outside the motor pool, the precise angle of the flag flying over headquarters, and the crispness of the salutes he received from the few Marines he passed. His destination was Checkpoint 7, a small concrete guard shack at the northern edge of the base, near the family housing units. It was a quiet post, mostly responsible for verifying ID cards of civilian employees and deliveries. It was the kind of duty you gave to a young Marine who was either fresh out of school or one who needed to stay out of trouble for a while. Today, the guard on duty was a young man, and a private first class, whose name tape read Miller. As the colonel approached, he saw Private Miller step out of the shack and come to a position of attention. The young man's uniform was clean and pressed, his boots were gleaming, and his brass shone like gold. Hargrave noted this with a silent nod of approval. He was about 20 yards out, the standard distance for rendering courtesies. He braced himself for the sharp, crisp salute that was his due, a ritual performed millions of times a day across the military, a silent acknowledgement of the chain of command and the shared burden of service. But the salute never came. Private Miller stood there, ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over the colonel's left shoulder. His hand remained glued to his side. Colonel Hargrave continued his approach, and his own pace unwavering. He thought perhaps the young man was nervous, that his brain had frozen for a moment. It happened. He was just a kid. The colonel would give him a chance to correct his error. He came within 10 feet, still nothing. The young Marine's face was an expressionless mask, but there was a tension in his jaw, a slight tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with the cold wind. Hargrave stopped directly in front of him. He was a tall man, and he looked down at the private, his own face betraying no emotion. He waited for 3 full seconds, the silence filled only by the wind and the distant rumble of a truck. The protocol was clear. The junior member always initiates the salute. This was not just a rule, it was a fundamental tenet of military courtesy. The failure to do so was not a minor oversight. It was a breach of discipline, a public display of disrespect that could unravel the very fabric of order if left unchecked. Private Miller. The colonel's voice was low, calm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. Is there a regulation you are unfamiliar with regarding the rendering of courtesies to a superior officer? The young man's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. His eyes finally met the colonel's, and in them, Hargrave saw not defiance, not laziness, but a deep, swirling pool of anxiety. "Sir, no, sir," Miller replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then you will explain to me, right now, why you are standing there like a stone statue while a field-grade officer is standing directly in front of you." The colonel's words were precise, clipped. He wasn't yelling. He never yelled. He didn't need to. Our Private Miller took a shallow breath. He looked away for a second, as if gathering strength from the empty landscape, then met the colonel's gaze again. "Sir, I cannot salute you, sir." I am physically unable to. Colonel Hargrave's eyebrow arched slightly. He had heard excuses before. Bad backs, sore arms, even a claim of a wasp sting once. But this was a new one. Physically unable? He repeated, his tone skeptical. Explain. The young man's face, which had been pale, flushed a deep red. His eyes glistened. He looked utterly miserable, trapped between the rigid expectations of the Corps and a personal truth he was terrified to reveal. He opened his mouth, but for a moment no words came out. He looked down at his own right hand, the hand that should have been snapping up to his brow in salute. It hung limply at his side. He slowly raised it just a few inches. It trembled violently, the fingers spasming uncontrollably. "It's my hand, sir," he said, his voice cracking. He quickly lowered it again, as if ashamed of its failure. "I can't control it. When I try to bring it up, it does that. It shakes and seizes up. I've tried everything, sir. I practice every night. But the moment I need to do it, especially for an officer, it just locks up." The colonel stared at the young man's hand, then back at his face. He saw the shame, the frustration, the sheer terror of a young Marine who felt he was failing at the most basic, fundamental task of his profession. He saw a boy on the verge of tears, not from fear of punishment, but from a sense of personal inadequacy. Colonel Hargrave's mind, and a highly efficient machine for processing information and making decisions, clicked through the possibilities. Disobedience? No. The fear was too real. Laziness? This boy was standing at attention with a fervor that bordered on painful. He was trying so hard it was hurting him. This was something else entirely. "How long has this been going on?" the colonel asked, his voice losing its earlier edge. Private Miller swallowed hard. "Since I got to my first unit, sir. About 8 months ago. I thought it would go away. That I just needed to get used to it. But it's just getting worse. My squad leader, Sergeant Kowalski, he's been on me about it. He thinks I'm being disrespectful. He's got me on extra duty for the last 3 weeks, trying to cure me of it." He gestured vaguely towards the guard shack. "That's why I'm on this post, sir. He said if I can't learn to show proper respect, I can stand out here where there's no one to see me fail." The colonel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew Sergeant Kowalski. A good Marine, a combat veteran, but old school to the point of being inflexible. The type who believed that all problems could be solved with enough push-ups and motivation. The thought of this young man, suffering from what was clearly a medical or psychological condition, being punished for it for 3 weeks was appalling. "Why haven't you been to see a doctor, son?" the colonel asked gently. The young man's composure finally broke. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, quickly wiped away by his good hand. "I was afraid to, sir. I thought if I went on record with something wrong with me, they'd kick me out. And this is all I've ever wanted, sir. My dad was a Marine. His dad was a Marine. I wanted to make them proud. I thought I could beat it. I thought if I just tried harder." His words trailed off into the wind. Colonel Hargrave stood silent for a long moment. He looked at this young man, not as a nameless private, but as a person carrying an immense weight, the legacy of his family, his own dreams, and a debilitating condition he was desperately trying to hide. The system, which was supposed to support him, was instead grinding him down. His own leadership, the very non-commissioned officers entrusted with his development, had failed to see the problem and had instead punished the symptom. The colonel took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "Private Miller," he said, his voice now quiet and firm, "is but stripped of all intimidation. Look at me." The young man reluctantly raised his eyes. "Standing here in front of your commanding officer, unable to perform a required task, and telling me the truth about it. That is one of the bravest things I have seen in over 20 years of service," Hargrave said. "It takes more courage to admit a weakness than to hide from it. You are not a failure. You are a Marine with a problem, and we are going to fix it. That is my promise to you." He saw the disbelief flicker in Miller's eyes. The boy had probably heard hollow words of encouragement before. "Sergeant Kowalski will be speaking with me this afternoon," the colonel continued. "Your extra duty is over, effective now. Effective immediately, you are to report to the base medical clinic. And I will make the call myself to ensure you are seen today. I don't know what this is. It could be stress, it could be something neurological. But we are going to find out. And whatever it is, we are going to deal with it. Your job is to be a Marine. My job is to make sure you have what you need to do that job. That includes your health." He then did something that shocked Private Miller to his core. Colonel Hargrave, the stern, imposing figure of authority, slowly, deliberately, raised his own right hand to his brow in a crisp, perfect salute. He held it there, his eyes locked on the young private. "Private Miller, you are dismissed," the colonel said. It was the ultimate, profound reversal of their roles. The senior officer was saluting the junior enlisted man. He was not saluting the rank, but the person. So he was acknowledging his struggle, his honesty, and his intrinsic value to the Corps. He was saying, without a single word about it, that their shared humanity was more important than any regulation. He was bridging the vast chasm of rank with a single powerful gesture. Private Miller stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The tears he had fought so hard to hold back now flowed freely down his cheeks. He didn't know what to do. His body screamed at him to return the salute, but his traitorous hand remained locked at his side. For the first time, he wasn't ashamed of it. For the first time, the man standing before him saw his failure not as a character flaw, but as a battle wound. Colonel Hargrave held the salute for another long second, then smartly dropped his hand. He turned and walked away without another word. His strides long and purposeful, heading not back the way he came, but directly towards the base headquarters. He had calls to make, and a Sergeant Kowalski to educate. Private Miller watched him go, his heart pounding against his ribs. For 8 months, he had lived in a private hell, convinced that his body's betrayal was the end of his dream. In the span of 5 minutes, one man, with simple observation and profound empathy, had shown him a different path. He was still terrified of what the doctors might find, but for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. He was still a Marine, and his commanding officer had just reminded him of that in the most powerful way imaginable. The wind still blew, the flag still flew, and the world looked exactly the same. But for Private First Class Miller, everything had just changed.